Hi, we're Matt and Lindsay Kjar. I'm Lindsay.
I'm Matt.
You may have heard us before on Allan and Kattie's podcast. They interviewed us several months back, and when I found out that Allan was going to be going back to church, when I read his message about that online a few days ago, I approached him and asked if it would be okay if I participated as well. I have not gone to church since winter time. This last winter, I think it was maybe February or early March. And my last experience at church was me coming home crying. And so ever since then, even that same day, I just thought to myself, you know what? I'm not going to stop there. I'm not going to have my last day in church be me crying. I want to be able to be amongst those friends and neighbors and my husband, and I want to be able to sit through a meeting and listen and find the good and, and just be able to participate when I have nephews and nieces and brothers and sisters who are having events, where I would need to go to a church meeting. I want to be able to do that and not have it be such a traumatic experience for myself. And so when Allan said that he was going to go back to church, I immediately just wanted to join him, and I wanted to take on that challenge as well, to give it a shot and just to see how it goes and just to be super curious. So that was my goal. Going to church today was to just be curious, to just go and watch and listen and to remember like what kind of set me off last time, and to be curious why that happened, and to, just try to figure out, is church a place that I want to be once in a while? And is church a safe place for non-believers? And does it need to be safe? Is it okay if it's not safe sometimes? Anyway, so those were the questions that I was kind of posing to myself as I went to church today. As Matt and I woke up this morning, do you want to kind of tell a little bit about that, Matt? We had a teary conversation, as we often do.
So, Lindsay, I came home from a scout camp, and she said, I'm going back to church tomorrow. And I was like, really? Because the previous time, not only did she have a rough time, I had a rough time because she had a rough time. In fact, there was a comment given in a lesson, and I ended up having a really...
Why don't you tell a little bit about like what the lesson was about and like just the direction it turned?
The lesson, it was a Come Follow Me Sunday school lesson, and I found out later, and so this gave me a little bit more opportunity to have a little bit more love and grace for somebody else, that the person who was teaching the Sunday school lesson was kind of asked last minute to teach. So he wasn't fully prepared, and the topic was something to the effect of...
the light of Christ.
The light of Christ. Yeah, it was the light of Christ, and he started by talking about some people that he knew who had left the church, and how he'd seen, in his opinion, he'd seen the light of Christ go out of their lives. And
a coworker who just had never been a member of the church.
Yeah. And as Lindsay describes it, her eject button went off, and she was like, I have to leave. And so after she left, I sat there for a few minutes thinking, what am I doing? Like, what am I going to do about this? And I couldn't just sit there through the rest of the lesson and know that my wife had just walked home in tears. And so I left and went to our house and comforted her. But then I also knew that I wanted to be back there to try and understand what I was feeling. And I didn't want to have hard feelings towards this person.
That was the funny part about it too, is that my eject button did go off, but it felt useful to me. I didn't feel like, oh, someone just abused me and now I'm a victim and I have to leave or something. It didn't feel that way at all. I just felt sad. That was it. And I think because I've been trying to do so much work on myself personally, like just owning my own emotions and feelings and just allowing myself to feel emotion, that's what happened. I just allowed myself to feel emotion, and when he said those words, I felt super sad. And so I walked home crying, but it was like a really useful emotion. It was a useful cry. I got home and I cried for probably another 5 or 10 minutes, and then I was done. And the entire time, I honestly never even felt malice towards him. I just was like, that was just sad. That was just an unfortunate situation where I heard words that just didn't feel good or kind, and I felt sad about them. And it was interesting, though, because Matt did feel very defensive. He came home and was like, why did he have to do that? And I was like, it's fine. Like, I'm not mad at him. I was actually super grateful because I had had an opportunity to speak with this same gentleman several weeks earlier at a Christmas party, and I had gotten to know him. And I think if I hadn't gotten to know him, that I too may have been like, like, gosh, why was that guy being so harsh with people, who are inactive or people who aren't members of the church? But I think because I'd had those, that 20 minutes to sit and visit with him and kind of get to know him, my instinct was to give him the benefit of the doubt and just be like, oh, he probably just doesn't know that many people who have left the church who still have a light about them, right? And if people don't know a lot of people like that, then of course it would be simple for them. Their eye would be looking for that, right? His eye was looking for flaws in theories and people's lifestyles that don't match his own in order to make his seem justified. I think that's what we all do. And so I kind of was like, it's fine. I don't blame him. He probably just doesn't know that many people, and Matt is still trying to drop the frustration with him. But anyway, so that was my last experience at church, right? It
was interesting because I did go back, and if your eject button hadn't gone off, and if I hadn't left, I would have heard. I did hear when I got back a lot of comments because I think it was very evident that it was hurtful, and there were a lot of comments about people who have the light of Christ and are not members of the church, and a lot of people kind of almost confronting him. And so it was interesting because there was a lot of discussion. I think it was a very productive discussion. I think it was very good. It was a good thing that a lot of people were able to witness and to kind of see it within themselves and to try and figure out how they navigate their life and how they navigate this kind of situation, because it's common that you're going to run into somebody who is not of your belief. Even people who are in a marriage who completely are active LDS, it's still a mixed faith marriage. Sure. They still have different beliefs. Whether that's like, well, I understood this scripture that way and you understand it this way. We all have differing beliefs. Yeah. And so it's good for people to recognize that, like, not everybody sees things exactly as I do, and that's okay. And how am I going to communicate? That's ultimately what we want to do is have connection and communication. That's really what we're, why we have human relations, is to have that connection and that communication. And that's what we're trying to do. Sure.
And I think the older both of us get, the more we realize that is like the happiest thing in our whole life, right? Is like our relationships with each other, with our kids, with our siblings, with our friends. Like, they just bring so much joy to us. And so we live in Bountiful, Utah, right? Like, everyone we know is Mormon, and there is a little bit more diversity on our street right now than there probably has been in the past, and we love that. We're so grateful for that. But I want to be able to go once in a while and have it be an okay experience. So that's what Matt and I were laying in bed talking about this morning, is like, is being active in the LDS church, is it kind of similar to like being in a Facebook group, right? Where there are these moderators who kind of make some rules as to what's okay and what's not okay. And then different people decide if they want to come or if they don't want to come, or the moderators decide you get to come in or you don't get to come in, right? And then once you're in the group, like, you get to participate, right? And if you participate the way that the people in the group like, then they'll give you likes and they'll give you thumbs up, and the moderators won't block your comments, right? And if you participate in ways that are not favorable, to the group, then of course you can get blocked, or people will give you, disparaging comments, whatever. So that's what I was like kind of thinking this morning, like, do I even want to do this? Am I signing up? Am I like inviting myself to a party, to a Facebook group, right, that I'm really not even welcome in? And so that's where I started falling apart this morning. We're laying in bed and I'm just kind of sobbing as I'm trying to just think through this and just figure it out, and just pedal through it. And, when Matt left, Matt had to leave at 8:30 to go to a meeting. And when he left, he didn't think I was coming. I was like, you know what? I really don't think that I'm welcome there. Like, I don't think people want me there, And I thought about the idea of even bearing a testimony, and then I started thinking, gosh, you know what? Like, how many times have they read from the pulpit letters explaining what a testimony is and what it isn't? And I could not bear a testimony that fits the description, that they would want. So they don't want me to bear a testimony, and they really don't want me to give comments. I remember being active in the church and having a couple different people who came at different times, right, and who gave comments that were just contrary to the norm. And I just remember feeling immediately like uncomfortable and like, oh, I wish they hadn't said that. And you know what I mean? And so I just know, because I used to be very active, that that's not what people love, right? I mean, there are always a few people there probably who are like, that was great, thanks for that comment that made us all think. But 90% of the people there wish you wouldn't speak up if you have something to say that goes against the norm, right? And so that's where I was like, okay, why am I even doing this? Like, why is it so important to me to be able to go there? And why would would I be able to sit through a lesson if they're saying lots of things that I disagree with? Would I be able to just sit there quietly and feel like that was a good, productive thing for me to be doing? Maybe it's just best if I just don't even go, And of course, that's the last 2.5 years when I have been inactive. That is kind of where I've been. I'm like, you know what? It's just better if I'm not there. I just have so many other things I want to do with my time and with my energy than to listen to that and to feel looked down upon when the lessons are about, people that have gone off the path, that are in the dark, you don't realize how often, that rhetoric and that language comes up until you're the one who left, who's off the path, who's in the dark, who has fallen away. All those comments, like you just don't notice them until you're the one, right? And then that's when church starts to feel so hurtful and so exhausting. And so it's like, gosh, for the longest time, it just did not feel worth it. But yeah, after this last time when I came home crying, I was determined. I was like, you know what? I'm not ending like this. I'm not just going to walk away crying and never go back again. I'm going to get to a point where I can go and sit through a meeting and it's going to be okay. So that's where we were. So Matt leaves for his meeting this morning at 8:30. He's pretty sure I'm not going to come because I've convinced myself that I am not welcome at the party. And then 12 o'clock rolls around, and who walks in?
You do.
It's me.
In sparkly gold shoes and black pants and this great little sweater, and she just walks in and sits down next to me, and I'm like, oh, hi.
You decided to come.
You decided to come. And it's interesting because it's interesting when someone goes through a faith transition. I think you all go through a faith transition. It adjusts even in the slightest way of how you look at things or how you think about things, and you have to make sense about things for yourself. And you can't, I think it's unfair to say you should or you shouldn't to either one of you.
Totally.
And so sometimes that's where our brains really want to go. They want to go to, here's my manual for you, and this is what you should do. Mm-hmm. Here's my, these are the things that I think you should be doing. Mm-hmm. And it's really, it's unfair to the other person, and it's unfair to you because you are suddenly giving your power over to somebody else to say, okay, if you do these things, I'm going to feel happy. And if you do these things, I'm going to feel sad. And so when you came in, I really was trying to think, okay, because I trust you and I love you. And that's what I said to you before I left. Mm-hmm. I said, because you said, I don't think they want you there. And I said, I want you here or there or wherever you want to be. And because I don't think that it's necessarily important for you to come to church with me. If it doesn't feel productive, I don't want you to be there. Mm-hmm. Like if it feels hurtful for you, I don't want you to be there because I love you and I want you to be in a place that you're growing and learning. And I don't want to be home. I don't want to leave and not be at church because I feel like it's a place that's helpful for me. Mm-hmm. But I understand that that's not the case for everybody. And
we've run into, just a roadblock a few times, right? Where I say, but like, remember last time how I left crying? Like, why doesn't that make you not want to go back, right? And that's such a tricky question, right? Because it's not fair, but it is, right? It's just like such a tricky one. I used the example to Matt this morning, like, what if our teenage daughter like went and hung out with some friends and they like said, these things that made her cry? Like, would you want her to go back there again? And would you want to go hang out with those kids again, right? And I know that that's not a perfect example by any means, right? But at the same time, like in my head, it makes sense. And I'm like, why would you want to go hang out with those friends that made our daughter cry, you know? And so anyway, so we're still working through that kind of stuff. Like, it's just tricky, and there's no perfect answer to, like, you know, and really in the end what we've come to is that, like, Matt doesn't have to have a perfect answer. All he has to say is, please trust me that I go there not to hurt you, that I go there because because it feels beneficial to me. And if it ever stops feeling beneficial to me, then I'll stop going, right? But for now, and same with me, like I will start coming back if it starts feeling beneficial to me. And I don't have to have reasons, like, you know, this is what we did for the longest time, right? We would just make these lists of reasons. Like, these are all the reasons why Lindsay should keep coming to church. These are all the reasons why Lindsay shouldn't keep coming to church. These are all the reasons why Matt should stop going to church. These are all the reasons why Matt should should keep going to church, right? And those lists, like, they just never work out, right? It's such a miserable place to be because your list always feels more justified and always feels more true.
And more important.
And more like, like, if you are a good human, like, you'll see that my list makes more sense, right? It's a miserable place to be.
Well, and it's interesting because Brene Brown talks about how you know, with empathy, empathy is trying to understand where the other person is coming from, but she uses the analogy of lenses, and she says you can't physically take off your lenses. Yeah. They are soldered to your brain. Mm-hmm. You can't, and so I physically don't know what you're going through when it's so hurtful for you. And I can, and this is what I tried to do this morning is I said I'll
stop there for just 1 second. And I physically don't know what you're going through, like why it's so good for you, right? Like I can try to convince myself that I know what's best for you, but I never do. Mm-hmm. I just never do, right? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and that's what I tried to do this morning. I tried to be really empathetic, because sometimes we'll get into a situation where we start trying to convince each other, and we're almost like teenage brothers and sisters who are like one-upping each other. Mm-hmm. And I really tried to approach this situation as your partner, as your husband, as your friend, and just listen and be empathetic. And I said, I'm sorry, that sounds really hard. Mm-hmm. That sounds really hard, and I'm sorry. And that
was amazing. Thank you for doing that, by the way. Like that, I think that was like one of the best conversations we've had in such a long time, because it didn't get defensive and you didn't try to fix it. You just kept telling me that you're sorry and that it felt that sounded really hard. And I could tell you meant it, and it was like huge to me, and it was beautiful. Like you left and I was like, I felt so loving towards you. And in the past, it hasn't felt that way at all. It's just felt like, oh my gosh, like, are we going to be able to make it through this? This is like, is this more than we can handle, right? Like this whole mixed faith marriage thing. But I think the more we get to that place where we truly like just let the other person feel their pain or feel whatever it is they need to feel, right? And we don't need to fix it for them, and we don't need to get defensive, right? Like that's when like it's just like that rocket fuel towards like a future that feels hopeful and that feels like so much more fun than the one where we're just constantly fighting and comparing lists and proving each other wrong. Totally. Yeah. So anyway, so church ended up being fine. Like the lessons this week, I mean, you know how it is. It's like, it's a crapshoot from week to week. Sometimes the lessons are just laden with, you know, remarks that are built into them. And other times they're laden with comments, you know, that just come from people who are really doing their best, but just, you know, they just don't know that some things they say sound so harsh to someone who has left. And so today, honestly, like I absolutely zero complaints. Like the testimony meeting was beautiful. I was crying, which always makes me laugh when I go back and cry, because I think people always notice. They're like, oh, she's crying, she's going to come back.
Well, and it was, to me, it was everything a testimony meeting should be.
Totally.
It was, the bishop was really, really cognizant at the very beginning and said, we invite you to come up and share testimonies of Jesus Christ and share testimonies of how the Holy Spirit acts in your life. Mm-hmm. And we remind you that's what we'd like to hear about. Those are the testimonies that we'd like to hear.
Which does remind people, you know, who come. It says visitors welcome, but it doesn't mean that visitors are welcome to go up and bear testimony if they don't believe in Jesus Christ as a Savior, right? And so, but everyone has their own interpretation of that. Allan, I'm excited to hear how yours went, if you went up and bore your testimony, but And I'm still considering maybe doing it if I can figure out a way, to make sense of a testimony that would make sense to me. And maybe I'll even pass it by the bishop before and ask him if he thinks it's okay if I, say a few things. Because I do still think a lot about Jesus. I just don't see him as a personal savior like I used to, And so I'm not certain that like the moderator of that group would be, would block my responses, or if he'll want them, if he'll, think they're fine. So maybe I'll pass it by him. I don't know. I'll think about it. But
it's kind of like knowing your audience. That's the thing that's interesting about it, is it's kind of like knowing your audience, because you're not going to, you think about like the things that you say to a 5-year-old, you're not going to tell them, this in-depth thing about whatever it is. So knowing your audience, I think that was the thing, that was kind of the switch that happened in my head. I was like, this is a different audience for, this podcast, for example, has a different audience. The people who are coming to listen to this know either one of their spouses or both, or know that there's an issue about faith. Mm-hmm. And so when we talk about these things,
so sensitive, right?
Yeah.
So careful.
We're aware, and we're very cognizant of the things that we're saying. And at church, it's a different audience. And if you're at if you're at a rock concert, it's a completely different audience than at a church meeting.
Which, don't you think, honestly, when you think about it, like, I don't know, people in mixed faith marriages have so many advantages, because I think when you're in an echo chamber, either in or outside of the church, it really truly is a little bit more difficult, I think, to see the perspectives of your fellow, humans. And I think when you've got two people in one house who have such extreme polar views of like their existence and their, pre and post life, like that, I don't know, that stuff, I really do think it's an advantage to most of us.
It's a superpower.
Yeah, and to our kids, right? Like that we just have this, and it's hard. I think in lots of ways our life was easier in some ways, before I went through my faith transition, and our kids just had two parents who just took them to church every week, and it was, in lots of ways, it was so much simpler, right? Yeah. But now it's, I don't know, in so many ways now, the depth of our thought processes and the depth of our love for one another has had to evolve and has had to just deepen, It
has.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because it allows you to evolve yourself. It allows you to think more deeply about what you believe and why you believe it, mm-hmm. and what you don't believe and why you don't believe it. It allows you to allow somebody else to have a belief that doesn't match with what you believe and be okay with it, mm-hmm. which is huge. That allows you to have not just empathy, but it allows you to have connection. It allows you to have that intimacy.
Yeah.
And without, sometimes understanding where somebody's coming from, you have so much more depth of feeling and depth of like connection and saying, oh, wow, I didn't know that was that hard for you. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It allows you to have so much more intimacy in your marriage and
mm-hmm.
so much more intimacy with yourself, almost like
sure.
understanding what you believe and why you believe it. Mm-hmm. It's powerful.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Yeah. So sure. I think it was for me, it was a model sacrament meeting. Totally. I was like,
I know, bring it on next week, Bountiful Ward, because we know you can do better than that. We know you can try harder to offend me. No, I'm totally joking. No, like honestly, and it's never that. It really isn't. Like I've never been a person who's like easily offended by other people's comments and stuff. But I am sensitive to other people's words, right? But I don't make it mean anything about them. I'm not like, oh, I hate them or anything. It's never been like that. It's more just like, oh, like how do I process that? How do I make sense of that? So anyway, it wasn't, as far as meetings go, it was a 2-hour block that was relatively easy. I mean, I could have like nitpicked a few things, to point out, but 99% of it was very sensitive to like, to a large audience of people. That anyway,
I kind of think that's like it felt like, to me, it felt like that's really what people are trying to do anyway. Like they were trying to be loving, and I don't think that they were like on their like we have to be a model citizen now because we have somebody in the audience. I think that people really do try their best.
They try their best. I think a lot of people are very unaware, though, that there's anyone in the audience who doesn't think just like them, right? And so that's when the really insensitive comments come out that can feel really hurtful.
Yeah.
And even just like, there were several things said, I don't have beyond a shadow of a doubt, all those comments like that. And you're just like, so if I do have a shadow of a doubt, then what, right? Like, then is that a problem? And right, like people just say a lot of things like that where they're just so certain and they're so sure that they know exactly how things are, right? And that never even phases you until you're the one who's doubting, or you're the one who has left. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, are we looking down on the people who do have doubts? Or and it's tricky. So anyway, so we'll stop here before we go on for too long, but thank you for this opportunity, and we will look forward to talking again next week, and and just going back to church again next week. So week 2, here we come. We're gonna